This is episode 286 of Mitolife Radio. I'm Matt Blackburn, your host, and today I'm interviewing Dr. Scott Sherr. He's been on the show several times the last few years. I've interviewed him on methylene blue, on hyperbaric oxygen therapy, on the benefits of his product called TroCalm, which is a GABA promoter. And in this show, we're talking about immune health with their new product called TroMune, which is one ingredient. It's Cordyceps extract, this compound called Cordycepin. Scott explains how it's been used for thousands of years in Chinese medicine, all of the effects it has on the body, including improving immune health, respiratory health, energy, stamina, libido, kidney health. And he breaks down a lot of the science of how it works. It's actually an adenosine analog. You may be aware of adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, which is the energy currency of the cell. So this is called CATP for cordycepin triphosphate, and it works just like ATP. So Scott goes into that, which is really fascinating. We talked about timing, dosing, how cordycepin downregulates mTOR, how it can improve sleep. And most fascinating to me is its effects on mitigating the stress effect of caffeine, the jitters, the anxiety. I've really felt that strongly from the TroMune product. My caffeine tolerance is the highest it's ever been when I take the TroMune. So that's a cool thing to keep in your tool chest. Scott also talks about how it can help with travel and changing time zones, helping with gut inflammation, how it's an antioxidant and decreases inflammation. And then at the end of the show, we revisit methylene blue a little bit, and I ask him about dosing and how it interacts with vitamin C supplementation. This is a really fun show. It's jam-packed with information. So enjoy. Here is Dr. Scott Sherr. Dr. Scott Sherr, welcome back.
It's good to be back with you, Matt. It's been too long, but I'm glad we got like 45 minutes to catch up before even recording. So that's good.
We always have so much to talk about, and yeah, we're into the same things, and you're always coming out with new stuff and researching, and I think the recent product is TroMune, right?
Yeah, we're really excited about this one, Matt. I mean, what we're always doing at Troscriptions is pushing the envelope. We've done that since the beginning, and I think that's maybe why we're kindred spirits with you. Even though you've come out with products that people would say are not, like a vitamin E or something like that, you're going to the ends of the earth to find the best stuff physically possible, like to the Siberian tundra for your shilajit and things like that. And that's what we do at Troscriptions. We really are going towards the ends of the earth for things. And Dr. Ted Atracosa, who's our formulator, our chief scientist, our founder, he's a dude with an IQ that ranges between 180 and 210. For those who don't know, the average IQ is 100. All of us think we have above average IQs, but in general, that's the average. His IQ is 16 standard deviations above that mean. So as you can imagine, me, just a lowly doctor that lives outside of Boulder, Colorado, trying to keep up with him has been an endeavor for many years. And Boomer Anderson, who's our CEO, I think we're all relatively smart people, but it's all relative, as I would say. So whenever we're coming up with new products or thinking about new ideas of how we want to help people, it always comes back to being a clinician. I'm a clinician, as I'm an internal medicine physician specializing in hyperbaric therapy, and we've had conversations about that in the past if anybody's interested. And we're always looking about the fact that we're trying to help people right now, right? It's very difficult when you're on the path to healing, as from your own journey. And many people know that are listening, we all want to feel better tomorrow, but it takes 4 months, 6 months, a year longer. So the whole ethos of Troscriptions is how can we help you now while you're on the longer path to optimizing your health, getting off the grid and living in a homestead or buying a bunker or whatever it might be, and doing what you need to optimize your health. Like, you've been on a journey. All of us have been on a journey. And so what Troscriptions has tried to do is that the path to optimizing your health takes a while. And there are a lot of roadblocks along the way. So we came out for things with mitochondrial function with methylene blue. We came out with products for anxiety and stress that work on the GABA system, which are very important because the GABA system is the brakes of our brain. We need to be able to calm the fuck down. None of us know how to calm down anymore. And so we're always on. How do we turn off? At Troscriptions, we're developing products that we're trying to help the brain turn off. So we have something called TroCalm, which is for anxiousness, tension, stress. And then we developed something called TroZ, which also is involved in working on the GABA system. But as Dr. Ted was researching for our sleep product called TroZ, which has 8 different ingredients in it, we found this one ingredient that was very special and much different from any other ingredient that we had encountered before. So TroZ had something called agarine in it. For those who listen to that podcast or who are interested in what that means, that's actually the non-psychedelic compound in the Amanita muscaria mushroom. And what's cool about agarine is that it's long acting. So it stays on the GABA receptor. It stays there for a long period of time. So it helps you not only fall asleep, but maintain your sleep. So the mushroom itself has something called ibotenic acid. Ibotenic acid is the one that causes the psychedelic experience. So we had that mushroom ingredient and we were using it in TroZ. Then we stumbled upon, or Dr. Ted doesn't stumble upon anything. He does hundreds of hours of research to this other mushroom called the Cordyceps mushroom. I think you're familiar with Cordyceps a little bit, right, Matt?
Yeah, for years I was adding, I think, 3 grams to my coffee, and I was kind of alternating that with lion's mane and reishi. But I think I was mostly drawn to the Cordyceps because of all of them, that was the one I felt the most.
So Cordyceps has been used for at least 5,000 years in Chinese medicine. And so it's got such great backstory, right? The history of the Cordyceps is fantastic, right? So the fast forward is that we're using the most active component of that mushroom called Cordycepin. But before we get there, let's talk about history because I was a history major in college. I love this kind of stuff. So Cordyceps, the mushroom, used for thousands of years in Chinese medicine, but very difficult to find. It was only for the elites, the people with lots and lots of money. The first source of the Cordyceps mushroom was actually from caterpillars. So it grew on caterpillars, then eventually took over their nervous system and became its own mushroom. So if anybody has watched a show on HBO called The Last of Us with Pedro Pascal, this is a apocalyptic story where this Cordyceps mushroom mutates in some way and starts infecting humans, taking over their nervous systems and making them into zombies that need to kill other people to make them zombies. And in the show, what happens is eventually they just become one giant Cordyceps mushroom when they die, as zombies. But so the Cordyceps mushroom doesn't infect humans like in The Last of Us, but it does infect ants and other insects and small animals like caterpillars.
You sent me a cool video this morning from National Geographic about that.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great video. I love that one because if you guys check out National Geographic, you check out Cordyceps, it shows how what happens is the Cordyceps sends out these spores in the air, and then they infect, in this video, an ant. And then the nervous system of the ant gets taken over by the Cordyceps mushroom. And then that ant goes to the right specific spot where it's the right sunlight, right moisture to turn in to a Cordyceps mushroom by basically eating it from the inside out and making it a mushroom. And then also in this video, it talks about how it can wipe out colonies of ants very quickly because of this particular process. But this was actually the reason why Chinese medicine doctors figured out that there must be something amazing happening with this mushroom, obviously, if it could take over the nervous system. So for thousands of years, it was used as something for libido, actually, to help with sexual function, immune system health, kidney health, respiratory health, so helping with breathing, and then also energy and stamina. And that's where the sexual libido part falls into it. So it's got this amazing history. There's 2 main species of Cordyceps. There's actually, I think, around 500 types overall, but the 2 main ones are called sinensis and militaris. So sinensis is not easy to find. This is the one that's still extremely rare. It grows on caterpillars in the Himalayas. So, I mean, what this reminds me of is I have kids, so I think of the movie Tangled, actually. So where they had to find this very specific flower in on this mountaintop, like to heal the mom. Like it's like that difficult to find this shit, right? So, and that's why it was only for the elites. But militaris is much easier to grow and much easier to cultivate. So that's the main one that you'll find in most places around the world when you're looking at buying cordyceps. And a lot of my colleagues in clinical medicine have been using cordyceps as well. Usually it's dosed in the morning because it usually is supposed to give you a little bit of energy. It has all these potential effects, and we'll talk about some of these as well. But it's many active components to it. Even some new studies have shown that the cordyceps mushroom is extremely important for all the things that I mentioned. In fact, there were some new studies on VO2 max increases, ATP production, and enhanced lactic acid clearance for muscle recovery and performance as well. But anyway, there's a lot of active components in the mushroom, but the main active ingredient is something called cordycepin. And that's where the story kind of rolls out. But just to before we get to cordycepin, there's a couple of other things in the mushroom. Some things including, they're called polysaccharides, or basically these sugars or carbohydrates. There's a mild amount of GABA in there. Lovastatin, which is a type of anti-diabetic medication, interestingly enough, and some vitamins, an antioxidant called ergothioneine, which is a very powerful one. But all of that just pales in comparison to cordycepin, which is the active ingredient. So I'll stop there for questions before I keep rolling.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, when I made the post, when you guys came out with TroMune, I wanted to do some research on it. And you've probably seen the study. I think it's the first one that pops up on Google when you search Cordycepin PubMed. But it was Ashraf, a 2020 study. And the abstract was great. It just goes through all of the things, like a lot of the things you already mentioned: anti-diabetic, anti-hyperlipidemia, antifungal, hepatoprotective. What's funny is the hyposexuality part caught my eye because I had to actually look up that term. And it's a fancy way of saying low libido, which
yes,
makes sense if it's increasing energy production.
Yes,
that it's doing that. And I notice on the website you call it an adenosine analog. Does that mean it kind of mimics adenosine in the body?
Yeah, exactly. So that's the key, is that cordycepin works just like adenosine in the body, but it's more potent than adenosine. Now, most people think of adenosine, and this is how we first thought about it, as, if anybody knows it at all, they know that when you drink coffee, it may affect a receptor in the brain that makes you feel sleepy. And this neurotransmitter and receptor combination is adenosine, and it's adenosine receptor. So when adenosine binds to its receptor, there's 4 adenosine receptors in total. When it binds to 2 of these receptors in the brain, it makes you feel tired. So adenosine gives you sleep drive. And so when we're designing TroZ, we designed it with a low dose amount of cordycepin in a dose that's been studied to increase sleep drive. So increase your feeling like you need to go to bed, and also your deep sleep as well. So it's working like adenosine in that capacity in the brain. But adenosine is working in so many different areas in the body. It's working on, it has 4 different receptors it works on, okay? And it's involved in like so many different processes. And that's how cordycepin is working, because it's really mimicking the role of adenosine in the body, not only as for sleep, but also as, so what is our energy currency in the body? ATP, right? Adenosine triphosphate. And so it can mimic adenosine triphosphate and actually be interculcated, or basically made into something called CTP, or cordycepin triphosphate, and work just like ATP. And in addition, it's also a base pair of our DNA and our RNA. So adenosine, thymine, guanosine, cytosine, these are our 4 nucleotide, and you have 2, they're both in base pairs, where this is our whole genetic code, right? So adenosine and then cordycepin can act just like one of those base pairs. And so we can talk about what that means in practice, but that means that in basics, it's potentially something that could be used in infection and in cancer, because in rapidly dividing cells, what happens is that you need adenosine to be put in there to continue to divide. But if you put in cordycepin instead, which is an adenosine analog, it blocks replication.
Wow.
So because it blocks replication, you stop the production of a cancer cell or stop the production of a virus or a bacteria that's growing very fast. So just to sum this up, and we can go into the details, is that adenosine has a massive effect across the board when it comes to the body. Everything from cell signaling, metabolism, immune system regulation, hormone regulation, cardiovascular regulation, and of course, sleep. And it does it through all these various things, some things called AMPK, and NF kappa B, which I'm sure you've heard of before.
That was awesome. So I guess when you were talking about giving you sleep drive,
yeah,
and with this CATP idea, taking TroMune won't make you sleepy if you take it in the morning or the afternoon. I think you mentioned that Dr. Ted high dosed it personally as an experiment, and he saw great results. And
yeah. So when you initially start taking TroMune or Cordycepin at high doses, what's interesting, right? Because if you took the mushroom, you wouldn't have this effect. You just feel like you were more energized. But what happens when you take Cordycepin at high doses is that you do initially feel sleepy. But over time, your body can get used to this and you don't feel as sleepy over time. So you can use it in the morning. And the other way to do this, which you won't be surprised about, is you pair it with something that's going to block the specific type of adenosine receptor that's related to you feeling sleepy, which would be
caffeine.
Exactly. So you can have caffeine in the morning and take your TroMune at the same time. And then, and this is the beauty. So we're working on this now. And this is what we're excited about, is that you can actually make it so that you're using the adenosine specifically for the other reasons, which is as an anti-inflammatory, as an immune system booster, as an antimicrobial, even during the day. But most people, when we start it, Matt, we have them started at night because number one, most people aren't getting good sleep overall. And I've had like amazing responses. So many people saying, I haven't slept that deeply in a long time. And just because of giving that adenosine boost. So like we'll have people often do is take like a half a TroMune and then also take a half a Tro-Z, for example, and they get the Tro-Z effect of comprehensive sleep support. And at the same time, they're getting the deep sleep component from the TroMune itself, and also the immune system aspects of it as well that are helping. But yeah, typically we have people start off at night and then titrate their dose over time. And then they can start adding another dose maybe before dinner and seeing how they feel there. And then if they're going to use it specifically for performance, we have them potentially start dosing it earlier in the day, along with using things like caffeine to help block those adenosine receptors overall.
Yeah, this is, I think, the most fascinating part of the whole discussion for me, because I've done a lot of experiments over the years, say the last 4 or 5 years with caffeine, where I'm fasting or I have it with carbs or different variations where I just feel different stress levels with my caffeine intake. And I think we've all been there where million phone calls and emails and some days you just have time for beef jerky or something and you're just running around. And what I noticed from the TroMune was the Cordycepin effect to kind of blunt that stress-inducing effect of caffeine. Is that directly related to what you were just talking about? Is that
exactly
how it's doing it? Cool.
Yeah, so it's blunting the effect of the caffeine in some ways because you're giving more adenosine, right? So in the sense that the caffeine will not, it's always a battle on some level at the neurotransmitter synapse receptor level, right? So how much adenosine do you have? How much caffeine do you have? And it's like, if you have a ton of caffeine, it's going to completely block it. But then you add more adenosine, then you might get some more adenosine effect to sort of mitigate the effect of the caffeine if it was too much. So definitely something going on there. But there's more to the story too. I think that we do know, as I was mentioning, that Cordycepin itself is working on a number of different pathways. And one of the main ways it's actually working is by decreasing something called NF kappa B. And the NF kappa B pathway, the easy way to think about this is that NF kappa B is responsible for creating an inflammatory response. And the problem with NF kappa B is that if it stays on for too long, it starts causing autoimmune problems, chronic inflammatory problems, cancers, just not good stuff, right? So for a lot of people that have chronic complex medical issues, their NF-kappa B system is just over-regulated, right? And they have a lot of inflammation. So what cordycepin can do is bind to a different type of adenosine receptor, not specifically related to sleep, but one that actually modulates the production of NF-kappa B. And so by modulating the production and decreasing the production of NF-kappa B, you're going to get a decrease in production of the various types of chemicals, called cytokines that are responsible for inflammation, like TNF alpha, which is something that we try with drugs for rheumatological diseases to decrease dramatically. And then when you have a lot of NF-kappa B around, it also prevents cells from dying that should likely die. We're always trying to recycle things. And what happens with the cordycepin being around is that it allows these cells to finally say, okay, you know what? We're good. We should have died a long time ago. Let's go ahead and do that now. So that correlates to what we would call zombie cells, right?
Interesting. Does it have an effect on C-reactive protein? I'd imagine it does.
So it hasn't been studied specifically with CRP levels. And actually, we're doing some initial studies now. I'm working with one of my integrative oncology colleagues, and we're looking at whether using cordycepin may be able to work on some of these easier inflammatory markers to study, like CRP, SED rate, fibrinogen, and others that are just blood markers. It's very difficult to measure things like TNF alpha and interleukin 1 and all these other kinds of things. So, but what I do get the sense of is that we're going to see these markers go down over time in people, but it's not going to be immediate. Like, it's not like if you've had a chronic issue that tomorrow these numbers are going to go down. So my sense is about at least a 30-day trial that people will need to be on it for more of a chronic inflammatory thing to see if there's going to be a benefit. It may need to be longer. And then the dosing may need to be higher as well. But I think from a day-to-day operations perspective, I think you can see significant benefit at lower doses if you don't have a significant chronic issue. Like, for example, to give you an example with my kids. So I was mentioning how TroMune is also antimicrobial, right? And it does this because it blocks replication of rapidly dividing cells. And this includes viruses, for example. So it's actually been studied in a number of different viruses, like Epstein-Barr, something called SARS-CoV-2. We've heard of that before. Hepatitis C, even in dengue, actually, there's some research. But even for the common cold, dude, so of course, I'm a clinician, as Dr. Ted is. We have 4 docs on my team. And so before we release a product, we test the shit out of it. So, and test this on ourselves, on our families, on our patients. And so what I was doing was testing it on my kids. And of course, I don't recommend doing this without practitioner supervision, and do not take this as medical advice. Anything that I'm saying in this podcast for you personally, you need to see a practitioner, all the disclaimers. Okay. But I found that if I just gave a quarter to my kids, like when they were starting to feel like the scratchy throat was coming on, and the usual progression for many of us, like, oh, my throat hurts, I have a sore throat. Then I start getting a stuffy nose and then I get a cough. And then if you're like my wife, you for 2.5 weeks before you stop coughing. So I gave it to my wife. That's probably the first example I should give. She never takes anything that I give her. Number one, just doesn't listen to me. And that's okay. If you've been married for as long as I have or longer, I've been married 15 years this year. Like, everybody listening will know that your spouse just does not listen to you for 90% of the things just because you've been married so long, right? So anyways, she wasn't feeling good. So I gave her a full TroMune troche and I said, look, just take this and let's see how you feel. First thing is that she already sleeps amazingly well. Can sleep through fire alarms and sirens and all that kind of crap. I'm not that way. So first of all, she started taking it. She slept even better than she typically did. And as we all know, when we're feeling ill, it's very difficult for us to get good sleep. I think it's one of the major ways actually that cordycepin and TroMune can help is that you can sleep better even if you're not feeling well, which is one of the reasons why you get sicker is that you're not sleeping well. And that's this cycle, right? So I gave it to her on day 2 or day 3 of her cold. By day 5, she was better. I initially started out with a full troche. Then she was feeling a little groggy in the morning, actually, because it increased her deep sleep and she wasn't used to that. She already gets a ton, I'm sure. So I gave her to a half and she did well. In about 5 days, she was done with her cold and had no cough for 2.5 weeks afterwards, which she always has. And either I or she has to get kicked out of the bed because I can't sleep. So because she's waking up all night and coughing. And so after that, I decided to try it on my kids at a very low dose, just a quarter of the troche, and found significant, like in 3 days, they were better. And without going through all the steps that you would typically have to go through. So it's my go-to, man. Like if I'm going to be traveling and I'm going to be in a different location, I take TroMune with me. And I'm always more susceptible to those viral things too when you travel. But I've been good for the last, 6 months, which is crazy. I mean, even as I have 4 kids, right? And all of my 4 kids are in school. It was the best winter we've had in I think ever.
Wow. So with your wife and kids in that scenario, and I wanted to ask you this question anyway, Troscriptions products are almost like a lozenge type thing that you put in between your cheek and your gum, and it goes straight to your brain instead of having to go through the liver. But in this application, are there situations like for them where just swallowing the troche would have the same effect?
Yeah. So troches are really awesome. Okay. For those that are listening, troches are a dosage form that is very rarely used in the supplement product world because they're not very easy to make. Let's just say that. You'd be stupid to try unless you were us, is what I would say, to try to scale these things. But the cool thing about them, as Matt just mentioned, is that they dissolve between your upper cheek and gum. And as a result of that, they work faster because if you swallow your supplements or capsules, they work slower because they have to go through your stomach, through your small intestine, through your liver. And that's all called first pass metabolism. Okay. And so that's going to be slower. And it's also going to decrease the bioavailability or decrease the amount of that particular supplement that gets into the body. The example I like to give usually is something called NAC, which many of your listeners will know. NAC is about 10% bioavailable. So if you take 100 milligrams of NAC orally, only about 10 milligrams are actually getting into the body. That's okay. I mean, what supplement companies will do is they'll just increase the dose to a number that will make it so that there's enough, hopefully bioavailable amount of that getting into the system. But be aware of this, right? When you're looking at a product, understand that some things will be degraded significantly. And also, I mean, as Matt, you can speak to this as far as like the type of, for example, vitamin E, right? I know you talk about how if you give it in a certain way, it's going to be significantly less bioavailable, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And vitamin C is the biggest example I get because that one's so misunderstood. And under infection, you could absorb so much more than you can in a healthy state. So yeah, there's a lot of misinformation out there about absorption, specifically with ascorbic acid.
Right.
But yeah, vitamin E is similar. And both of those are underrated magical supplements as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. And vitamin C, as a side note, if you have buffered vitamin C and you get it on any of your countertops, methylene blue, by the way, if you get methylene blue on any countertops, you can use buffered vitamin C and it'll take out the blue if you get very quickly to it, just as a side note for those that are listening.
Alcohol too, right? Does that work? Or
alcohol doesn't work as well as buffered vitamin C because vitamin C actually counteracts some of the blue in a chemical reaction. Yeah. It doesn't work in your mouth that way, by the way. But anyway, so back to troches. The troches work faster because they bypass digestion and they allow your ingredients to be more bioavailable. So when it comes to TroMune here, if you need fast acting relief, then dissolve it in your mouth is the way to go. Absolutely. It's because instead of being immune system supported antimicrobial in 60 minutes to 90 minutes, you're going to be supported within 15 to 30 minutes. So it's going to be much faster acting that way. Now, if you're taking it before bed, like I did with my kids or my wife, I don't think it's that big a deal because you can just swallow it and it's going to still work well, but the onset time is going to be longer. When it comes to the bioavailability, it is going to be more in the mouth than it will be swallowing. So you want to think about that depending on your dose as you're titrating things. But I mean, I love troches. I think it's also important to know that in some cases, like it's okay to swallow them too. You're going to get most of the effect, but it just won't be as fast. And the nice thing also about troches too is that they're titratable. So we have TroMune itself is actually going to be split up very soon into two different products. There's going to be TroMune, which is 75 milligrams, and then TroPlusMune, which is going to be 150. So we've been reformulating for this reason, because 75 milligrams is a great dose for day-to-day operations and for prophylaxis, but you need a higher dose maybe if you have an infection or if you have a chronic complex medical illness that may be better to be done at this higher strength. So the higher strength is only going to be available to practitioners. So if you're going to want the higher strength, you're going to need to go through a practitioner to get it. But again, I think for the most part, the 75 milligram dose is what most people need or less to see the benefit over the long term.
Could the higher dose also apply to high performance athletes or biohackers?
So I think that it's a titration game and it's a experimental game for many people, right? What I found over the years, especially working with methylene blue, is that people respond at a much lower dose than you would anticipate. Okay. And then the lower the dose, the better overall it is for the system as a supportive rather than sort of hitting it over its head. So I think that, like for my wife or for me, if I feel like there's an acute viral infection like that, right, then I would be doing like the 150s for sure. Right. But if it's something like, prophylactically, like I was on an airplane and there's somebody coughing next to me, I think the 75 is probably good. And I wouldn't go to the 150. Or if it's for performance, I would actually start even at a lower dose than that, like a quarter of a troche, and just add that to my routine before I worked out. We've been playing around with this, see if I get a little bit of a boost in energy, then add a little bit more, because that way you wouldn't have to worry about the fatigue part of it. It would just be more of a adenosine agonist and not see that sleepiness effect. Of course, I'd probably be combining with caffeine and maybe some nicotine too, and then also doing some exogenous ketones and doing all the crazy things.
Just take blue carnitine with it, right? Problem solved.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what we've been working on. It's like blue carnitine plus TroMune. And then I've been experimenting, at least personally, with exogenous ketones post-exercise as another way to kind of play with ketones a little bit. So, but anyway, that's a side thing. But in general, TroMune dosing is titratable like all of our troches. And so what I often recommend is going slowly with it and kind of seeing where your sweet spot is. And it may not be immediately obvious. That's the only challenge with something that's supporting your immune system, is that if it's supporting your immune system and you don't get sick, well, you didn't get sick. Like, what have you gotten sick? I don't know. It's like one of those games. But certainly if you have something that is more acute and you're noticing symptoms, then on the higher end of the dosing is probably better. But if using it more prophylactically, I think lower doses, and that's what I'm really excited about. I think this is going to be at lower doses, Matt. Like, this is something that everybody's going to benefit from long term. The information and the research is just so compelling. The other thing I wanted to mention about that is there's this other thing that gets talked about a lot in longevity spaces called mTOR. And mTOR is, I think it's like the mammalian target of rapamycin is the full name. And so mTOR is this growth signal. So if you want to gain muscle and strength, and when you eat, mTOR is activated, and mTOR promotes what are called like anabolic processes, right? So growth and recovery. But what also is induced by a lot of mTOR is cancer. And so there's a lot of interest now in mTOR blockers. So the most common one that many of your listeners may have heard of is something called rapamycin. So rapamycin is a chemotherapeutic drug, but at low doses, it's being used now in longevity circles to promote autophagy, so the actual recycling of your cells, and promote like mimic caloric restriction kind of thing. And so I have my own thoughts about caloric restriction in general, but I think that when it comes to mTOR downregulation, this is probably a good idea for many of us. So that's why I think that this Cordycepin itself is very compelling. So because it's also downregulating mTOR. And so you're decreasing that NF-kappa B, which is the inflammatory cascades. You're decreasing mTOR, which is the anabolic processes, which is interesting, right? Because you were just talking about exercise and performance, right? So the other thing that Cordycepin is doing is increasing your energy production at the same time as it's decreasing this mTOR signaling. Now, that may sound counterintuitive, and it does sound that way, but what it comes down to is that while you're decreasing mTOR, you're actually increasing something called AMPK. And AMPK is it's a kinase, it's a type of protein in the body that gets activated when there's less energy around. And so when the body sees less energy, what it does is it creates an increased stimulus to make more ATP, make more energy. Okay. And so where is that going to come from? That's going to come from the right. So Cordyceps can make that energy. And so you get energy production as a result of, but from a different pathway, which is super cool, right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so this is actually, so the side is interesting. It's actually so cordycepin has been studied in fatty liver disease, actually. And so this is when your liver gets real covered in fat. And it used to be just from alcoholics and alcohol use, but now it's also from people eating really shitty diets for long periods of time. And it seems with this fat composition, what AMPK can do if it's activated is actually get rid of this or decrease it.
Wow.
And the same thing with cardiovascular disease as well, helping decrease some of those lipid plaques as well. So, like, again, it's kind of interesting, right? Like, you would think if you were decreasing mTOR, you wouldn't increase your exercise performance.
Yeah.
But because you're using cordycepin and it's getting itself into the ATP production pathway, and at the same time, increasing energy production as well. Like, so actually increasing your ability to build by utilizing your glucose and your fat stores, like it's able to do both at the same time, which is like, it's very cool.
So you're saying there's no downside with taking cordycepin with exercise. You don't have to really worry about timing of before or after or anything like that.
They've even studied the Cordyceps mushroom before exercise, and it increases VO2 max, ATP production, lactic acid clearance. What I would say here is that I think for performance, we don't know for sure. I think the very high doses, like, I don't know if you want to use that for performance. It may be too high of a dose. Whereas if you're using like 25 milligrams or 50 or 75, I think that's where you're going to see your sweet spot. And we're playing with this now. We have people working on it. I've been working on it a little bit as well, looking at various markers, like if you have a ring or something. But
I still have it. It's just, I don't know. For some reason, I don't like having anything on my body.
If you're using TroMune at 75 or even anything above about 40 milligrams or before bed, you're going to see an increase in deep sleep. When you get up to 50, 75, 150, it's pretty obvious that you have a significant deep sleep increase. Now,
I'm going to measure it tonight. You inspired me. I'll wear my ring and see.
Yeah. So what you will notice, and this is something that people have to be mindful of, it does increase deep sleep, but it may do it at the expense of a little bit of REM sleep. So your REM sleep might go down a little bit. But if you're like me, sometimes you wake up paralyzed in REM.
My REM's always been higher than deep sleep, like always double. And I've never figured out why. Oh, okay.
That's a common scenario. Typically, your deep sleep is going to be less than your REM sleep. You get more deep sleep in the beginning of your evening, more REM sleep at the end of your evening. Typically, REM is at least about 1.5 times your deep sleep. So that's very common. For an average, I'll get like 1.5 hours of deep sleep and about 2 hours of REM sleep in general, if I'm in a good pattern. But what I found is that if I'm using TroMune at very high doses, like 150s for a couple of weeks at a time, which I've done in experiments, my deep sleep goes up about 25 to 30%. So, but my REM sleep will go down about 20%. So just to be aware of that, I think that overall, what we care about from a longevity marker actually is deep sleep more than REM sleep. They're both important, of course. But I think you see with a lot of my patients, I had somebody just like 2 days ago. She's a patient with chronic complex medical issues, 20 years, no sleep, like insomnia issues. She started taking TroMune and she was finally sleeping, and for the first time in 20 years, right? And this is because she was actually getting that deep sleep that she was missing. So you'll find that a lot of people will really benefit. So TroZ obviously has a low dose, has 40 milligrams of cordycepin, whereas TroMune has a significant array. So from like a tracking perspective, you guys, if people that are listening that are tracking, that's an easy one to track. When it comes to performance, if you have a Whoop or if you have a Garmin, looking at VO2 max is pretty interesting. So we're starting to do some studies, informal stuff here, looking at it and seeing where we can find the sweet spots. But if, anybody wants to share their data once they start using the products, I would love it. This is something that we always love people to do and get more info. Like VO2 max, now the Oura Ring has one too. But I'm not sure I'm convinced about it yet. But I think, like everything, all this data is good. Like if you're looking at it on your own in compared to what you're doing on a regular basis, but is it truly your deep sleep score? Is it truly your REM sleep? Is it truly your VO2 max? I don't think that's the case, but we do think that there's certainly benefit from looking at your data from day to day and tracking it.
Is that the green wavelength on the Oura Ring that tracks that? Because I think that's why I stopped using it. I got the new one and then I went to bed and it was glowing green under my sheets. And I'm like, what's going on? And they added the little green LEDs in there. I don't know why they did that. But.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's obviously different wavelengths of light that are measuring different things. There's a red, there's infrared, there's green. So I don't know. I'm not sure which one it is, but I know that this is a relatively new feature that they just turned on. So it's not like a new wavelength. It's been ongoing. They've just been working on their metrics and their algorithms for a while. But in any case, I think that it's always good to have objective data. And so if you're looking at like an Aura or a Garmin or a Whoop or whatever, and being able to, if you're following your data over time and you do kinds of interventions like this, you will see changes, right? And then those are the things that, if anybody's interested, I'd love to hear what's happening as they start TroMune and see they add it to before exercise just a little bit, or they add it when they're on an airplane when somebody was coughing all over them. Like, did they get sick? Did they not get sick? Right?
I wish I would have had it my last flight because I forgot my headphones and I made a post about it. And funny enough, the guy on the flight found that post because he followed me, and I was kind of complaining. It was a 3-hour conversation, and he said, dude, you could have told me on the flight. And I said, well, it was an interesting conversation, but yeah, just being face to face with somebody. And then that was on the way back too. I got super sick on the way back. So I wish I would have taken TroMune. But I wanted to, since you brought up VO2 max and oxygen, have you been playing around with Hyperbaric combined with TroMune and seen anything in people? Or
so just a little bit so far, just a little bit. I mean, because I've mostly been using TroMune as an anti-inflammatory and as something that people are taking at night. So I'm just starting with the idea of how I can use this before hyperbaric therapy, actually. But my consideration there is I got to get the dosing low enough that people don't get tired, because I don't want people drinking caffeine before they go into their chambers. Because caffeine, it vasoconstricts the blood vessels down. And so we don't want vascular constriction in the hyperbaric chambers. But what I have been doing is using methylene blue during the day, which I have been for a long time, and then using TroMune at night for immune system support as an anti-inflammatory, especially in my concussion patients. I've been seeing a lot of initial good benefits there, and people are sleeping a lot better. Obviously, that's going to be helpful. I've also found that there's some interesting things about gut inflammation as well, where people with a lot of gut inflammation seem to do really well with TroMune. There's some early studies that are looking at how it might help with the production of various types of organisms in the gut that are anti-inflammatory and help crowd out the ones that aren't as good for us. There's been studies in diabetic mouse models for this, which is interesting. Reportedly, Dr. Ted, for example, travels to the Philippines every year, twice a year, typically. Like, he would always complain that if you're going for a 12-hour time shift, your GI system, gut microbiota, on circadian rhythms, the same time clock as you are. So if it's a 12-hour shift, when it's time to go to bed, all your microbiota are like, hello, it's time to eat, it's time to hang out. And they wake you up. You get a lot of inflammation in the gut related to having that sensation of trying to eat in the morning when your body is trying to go to sleep, or vice versa. And so what he found is he was taking TroMune like every day when he was changing time zones. And he would typically have to, he would go up like at least a size because of that. But he noticed he didn't have to do that this time, that his gut remained regular. He had no bloating, no issues. And so I'm starting to use it now with some of my patients that have gut dysbiosis. But I'm just starting, and I'm going to check their stool analysis about 3 months after starting and seeing if it makes bigger shifts. Because one of the major things that I find is that people have bacterial overgrowth, they have pathogenic bacteria, they have leaky gut. And I'm always looking for ways to help people faster, because unfortunately, when you have a leaky gut and you have all this stuff going on, it takes like months, if not sometimes years, to get them better. And so I'm always looking for shortcuts here. So I think it's going to be very helpful. But it's still early for me to know.
That's really awesome. Yeah. I don't do crazy travel like that, but I'll keep it in mind if I ever do cross time zones.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's rough on the body, as we all know. So we have a bunch of posts at Troscriptions about methylene blue and jet lag. And we have a whole protocol related to methylene blue for jet lag, which is great. But I'm adding in TroMune there, especially when you arrive at your destination or at low doses on the plane. And then we're adding things like TroCalm in there to help with your nervous system, because when you're on a plane, you're hyperstimulated. And that's one of my favorites on planes is actually TroCalm. Just you just ran to the airport, you just ran through security, you just got violated by security guards, and they took away your honey. That actually just happened to me. I forgot you couldn't bring honey through security. I thought you could bring something that was solid, but you couldn't. I was so sad,
Wow.
but it was like a $14 thing of honey. But anyway, I'll get over it. But anyway, so it was using Trocom to relax. So anyways, travel is very hard on the system, as we know. So I think TroMune is a really great addition to the armamentarium. And then if you're worried about your brain, which most of us are, Cordycepin is now being studied in models for Alzheimer's, for Parkinson's disease, even Huntington's disorder, which is a genetic disorder, which is not reversible, but maybe helping, because what Cordycepin is really doing is it's like a very powerful antioxidant, really helping the system with inflammation. And so you're seeing significant benefits there as well. So I'm very excited, obviously, about this particular product and what we're going to be able to do with it. And we're really still in its infancy, Matt, as far as where we're going in some of the studies that we're doing. But we're going to see a lot more. I really think that it's going to be one of the things that many people can take daily or regularly for a benefit, which is really exciting.
The antifungal part's interesting because I think candida is going to be forever a popular topic as far as I've seen. Have you seen any research on cordyceps for yeast overgrowth or anything like that?
Not specifically yet for candida. What we've seen mostly has been as an antimicrobial sort of overall, but specifically as an antiviral mostly. But the inflammatory components are interesting, right? So if you can work on the inflammatory pathways and have a significant downregulation or decrease in inflammation, the whole system is going to be able to optimize or to regenerate itself better, right? So we always talk about get rid of stuff and the body can kind of heal itself. But to get rid of inflammation is also a big part of this, right? So if you're decreasing inflammation, then the body can potentially compensate for candidal overgrowth because we have other bugs in our gut that can compete for the same real estate. Like the biggest one we would know would be Saccharomyces, for example. Saccharomyces boulardii is a nutritional yeast that outcompetes many different types of fungus, parasites, bacteria. So you can use Saccharomyces, and I use it a lot in my patients because it has that capacity. We've used it for parasitic infections. I was recently using it for blastocystis infection, which is a very difficult gut infection with some good success. Also using it for things like H. pylori in the stomach. It can be helpful there. So typically it's a 4-drug regimen if you have H. pylori, which is not awesome for the system. So working on other natural ways of decreasing H or eradicating H. pylori is the big one for me in my practice because I see so many people with that. So, but I think the key with all of this, as we know, is like, can we get the system to work better, right? And the biggest way we can do that is by decreasing inflammation. So for something like we're working on that NF-kappa B pathway and the mTOR pathway. For something like methylene blue, we're working on the energy pathway and energy production and detoxification. For something like the GABA pathways, helping you calm the fuck down because we can't heal if we're always in go mode, right? We can't heal and that's, I think maybe why it's also great to have more deep sleep with cordycepin, right? But in general, GABA is your brakes. It's your neurotransmitter that's going to calm the firing down of your brain. So if you're calming things down, you can finally heal, as opposed to not being able to heal because you're always in fight or flight mode.
That's amazing. Yeah, I like your point about decreasing inflammation being a huge part of healing. And I might have to add this to my EMF protection stack because I've been talking about this for a while with all of the stickers and quantum beaming things and subscriptions. And everyone's talking about everything with EMFs, grounding, sunlight, but they're not talking about nutrition strategies to strengthen the body. I think magnesium was the only one I talked about years ago for the calcium ion channels opening when you're in the presence of artificial man-made EMF fields. But there's also vitamin C, vitamin E, zinc, selenium. Tons of nutrients have been studied. I think iodine is there. And I'm starting to wonder if cordycepin could help decrease that inflammation from being at like airports,
Yeah. So certainly methylene blue is a great EMF protector, we think, for the same reasons you just described, for the dysregulation of energy production. When you don't make energy well, your mitochondria start getting angry and start getting more mucked up with what are called reactive oxygen species or oxidative stress or free radicals, all the same name for the same thing. And as a result of that, you start getting more inflammation, right? And decoupling, which means that you stop making as much energy and everything else. So certainly methylene blue on airplanes is great because you're low oxygen on an airplane, and then you're getting the EMF, and then you're getting subject to all the viral blah blah in the recycled air that also has jet fuel in it, right? So there's all that. So it's protecting your mitochondria with methylene blue, I think, is really important. And I also think that adding TroMune in here, especially at low doses, is going to be very effective overall too. So again, as well, Matt, it's not like we're all doing just one thing here, but while you're doing something, you add one little thing and seeing how that shifts. Like, for example, when you're flying, if you add just like a little bit of Cordycepin and then have a regiment or a stack that you do, like, for example, if I get off an airplane and I know that somebody next to me or 2 rows below or whatever, not above, but I'm not on a double decker plane anymore. Those were cool. Don't very many of those anymore. But if you have somebody very sick or something on the plane, I'm pounding my TroMune. I'm going up to the 150 dose. I'm going up to high strength methylene blue. I'm doing it all, right? So I've found these regimens over the years that can be very helpful with blue. So you can use up to 2 milligrams per kilogram. I use 150 milligrams times 1 dose if I'm feeling like something's coming on. And then I'll use 25 to 50 milligrams for 3 to 5 days. And we have dosing now. It's called our Tro Plus blue, which is the 50 milligram strength for practitioners. So that's available. And then, of course, you can get it from another source. Just be careful out there because blue is not all created equal, ladies and gentlemen. Let me tell you, we've been testing this stuff. But anyway, so like you can find out and find regimens that help you. But a lot of this is going to be titration and seeing what works for you over time.
So you said for methylene blue, using up to 2 milligrams per kilo body weight is a safe if you're fighting something or
after like a one-time dose, like a 1 or 2 time. Like I don't typically keep it that high for very long. For example, my mom had a tick bite a couple months ago, and I really didn't want her to take doxycycline, but she wanted to take it, which is fine. But at the same time, I was like, if you're going to do this, let's give you 150 milligrams of methylene blue, and because that's a great antimicrobial dose, that's very safe. Up to 3 milligrams per kilogram is safe. Those high doses for long periods of time may not be safe, though. That's why we recommend if you're going to use high doses, especially for long periods of time, like do this with a practitioner, because there are some safety things you want to think about. But you were mentioning something earlier, Matt, which I think which kind of brings us back home for people, is that you're talking about with vitamin C. Like when you're sick, you can absorb a shit ton more vitamin C, right? The same thing goes with tolerability for very high doses of things like methylene blue or cordycepin. I found is that you can take it. Like I was worried actually because my mom had never had blue before and she knows I have a company, et cetera, et cetera. But I was like, Mom, it was like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm like, okay, I'm going to give you 150 milligrams of methylene blue right now. I don't know if you're going to sleep. You may feel too much energy. You may feel a lot of stimulation because some people can with that kind of dosing. But she slept so well. She felt so good. And then the next 4 or 5 days, I had her on high dose. And she's like, I don't want to stop this. I was like, well, let's go down to lower doses. And like, because you don't really need this as much on those higher doses anymore. And she's like, she's a believer, tells all her friends about it. Like everybody's now on TroBlue. She called me the other day. She's like, I started taking TroMune because I thought something was coming on. So it's good when your family members who are a little skeptical of these kinds of things tends to become huge believers. So, but anyways, just to give you a sense that I think that when you need more of it, because your body requires more, you're going to be able to tolerate more of it, right? At least for a short period of time. So increasing the dosing short term for like an acute inflammatory thing, acute infectious thing, for both TroMune and TroBlue, our methylene blue products can be very helpful.
That's awesome. I forget if I've asked you this in previous shows, but and you mentioned buffered vitamin C, which is like sodium ascorbate, and that's the one they give usually in IVs, like a buffered form. Orally, I really like ascorbic acid.
Right.
And I'm wondering if you've ever looked into, I think it gets into deep biochemistry with reducing, because I think if you mix vitamin C powder with methylene blue, it will get rid of the blue, right? Or it'll change.
Yes. Yeah.
So I've just always wondered, and I don't think I've ever asked you this, is with timing, if someone wants to take vitamin C and methylene blue, is it a question of half-life, or are they cancel
it's a
out?
good question. Yeah. It's a good question. So I typically will recommend people take them separately just in case. Mm-hmm. However, one thing you can do, it won't work, is if you use methylene blue in your mouth and you try to use vitamin C to get it out, it won't work. So it'll work on your teeth It'll work on like a surface I was mentioning earlier, like a sink, for example. So I don't think it has the same effect in mucosal areas or in the bloodstream that it would, on a surface like that. So they've done these things called the blue bottle experiments, where you can shake, you have methylene blue in a bottle, then you add vitamin C to it, it all goes colorless, because methylene blue it's called an electron cycler. So it has the ability to donate or to accept. And so when it accepts electrons, which does from vitamin C, it turns colorless, called liquid methylene blue. But my sense is it's not happening in the body the same way, is what it comes down to.
Okay.
To be safe and for the theoretical reason, I do have people break up when they're taking their antioxidants and methylene blue for that reason.
Okay. Is that just intuition?
Intuition is it doesn't. My intuition is it doesn't. Yeah. And I think it could be like we were just discussing. Maybe it matters more if, for example, you're sick and you have a lot more going on versus when you're not sick. So it matters. I would say actually it doesn't matter. So it'd be okay to take them both together when you're sicker as opposed to when you're more healthy or pretty well optimized. So that might be the indication there. I'm not sure. But in the end, my intuition is that it doesn't matter that much, but in practice, I do have people break it up just in case.
Awesome. We did have a few questions that came in, and one of them was good. So I think in that study I referred to, it on that list of all the benefits of Cordycepin, said anti-arthritic. And a listener asked, is osteoporosis an autoimmune disease? So
the answer is no. So osteoporosis is not an autoimmune condition. Osteoporosis is a localized inflammatory cascade that's happening because bones are hitting each other in ways that they're not supposed to, typically because cartilage has been downregulated and there's not as much cushioning between the joints. I have seen some benefits, though, from things that work on inflammatory cycles for arthritis, for example. Certain things like methylene blue have shown some benefit, at least anecdotally. There's also a really great lady that you can look up. Her name is Dr. Elizabeth Yurth. She works at a place called the Boulder Longevity Institute, and she talks about repurposed drugs. She talks about one particular one that's called Pantocin. That's very interesting, very exciting. It's prescription, but she's using it for arthritis injectable and seeing, like, I guess in some countries, you're reversing arthritis with this drug. So like preventing hip and knee replacements and stuff like that. They're very interesting. So it's one that I'm exploring soon with some of my patients. I'm just doing some research on it. But osteoarthritis is not an autoimmune condition.
How to increase killer T cells?
Yes. So there are different types of cells that cordycepin can actually modulate. One's called macrophages, which are kind of like the cells that eat up fungus, virus, and other kinds of illness. T cells, B cells, and then another one called natural killer cells. So natural killer cells are these types of cells in our body that they protect the body by destroying infected and cancerous cells. And so we want more of these, that's for sure. And we also want them to work better. So we know that cordycepin actually has a way of enhancing the cytotoxic or the killing effect of natural killer cells. The easiest way to get more natural killer cells is go get like a plasma exchange by somebody that's 18 years old, because our natural killer cell, they go down as we get older. But I mean, the biggest things we can do is, like we talked about, other than that, really, is decreasing inflammation, right? The same thing. If you're decreasing inflammation, you're going to increase the production of these natural killer cells, and they're going to work better. But cordycepin is working on helping enhance natural killer cells work better. And also all different types of immune cells that we didn't kind of go in here, but dendritic cells, which are a different type of immune cell, which promote the maturation of natural killer cells. And so you get more of those with cordycepin around, which is great, and also helps present them to T cells, which are our memory cells, B cells, antibody cells, et cetera. There's a lot more here, but I didn't want to go to like a full immune system lesson for everybody. But suffice to say, your immune system is kind of a big deal, right? And having it regulated and modulated to make you healthier and give you more of a chance to deal with inflammation is really key.
Would it be accurate to say that cordycepin trains your army, trains your troops to fight more effectively?
But I would say it provides the fertile ground where your cells can work better, right? So it's letting your body do what it's supposed to do, just letting it do better. So it's almost like that sort of elite trainer of your immune system, right? Where it's giving you the ultimate skills to do your function at maximal capacity, right? I think that's the way I would think about it, I guess.
That's awesome.
Maybe some extra cannons or catapults if we're going real old school.
Well, this was awesome, Scott. It was overdue. I love chatting with you. Troscriptions.com, right? Where people can check out all the products.
Yes, and your code.
Blackburn. There we go.
So I think you guys
you guys recently introduced bundles too, right? Or you've had those for a little bit?
Yeah, we have bundles too. We have a bunch of bundles on the website. one called the GABAnamic Duo, I think it's called. And that's our GABA products, our Trozy and our Trocom. We have our GSD, which is Get Stuff Done or Get Shit Done bundle. That's blue carnitine and just blue. And then we're going to have some more with TroMune coming up as well soon enough. But thank you for having me, sir. It's always a pleasure.
Oh, and when's the high dose TroMunes scheduled? Any idea on the time frame for that?
So TroMune is coming out. It's going back on the shelves by the end of July. So hopefully by this podcast, it'll be back on the shelves, which is great. And then we'll have our Tro Plus Mune available again late August, early September.
Awesome. Scott, it's always fun. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Appreciate it.
After this interview with Scott, I started wearing my Oura ring. I don't like wearing a ring throughout the day, so I just put it on at night, kick it into airplane mode, and I've been tracking my sleep. I'm curious to try his idea of half of a TroMune and half of a TroZ to see the effects of that on my deep sleep. I don't know how common this is, but this time of year, I usually get the worst sleep. The best sleep in my life actually happens in the snowy winter climate. So I'm really looking forward to the cold, and maybe once I move into my bunker next year, I'll sleep well year round because I'll have that geothermal constant cool temperature all the time. It's fascinating how Cordycepin affects so many different areas of health. I just talked about sleep, but as Scott talked about with CATP, it can block the replication of cancer cells or bacteria, viruses, just so many applications to this Cordyceps extract. I've been loving it. I didn't expect to like it this much, but I'm a caffeine enjoyer. I drink 2 espresso shots from fresh ground Mitolife coffee beans every morning post breakfast. My breakfast is 3 eggs for my chickens, sourdough bread with a ton of butter on it. And then I make my 2 espresso shots from my La Marzocco Italian machine, and then mix in maple syrup, some MCT oil, heavy cream that's been frothed on my machine. And then I'll take all my Mitolife supplements, a gram of Shilajit. Then usually an hour or so later, I'll take the TroMune, either a quarter of a troche or a half. And I really love how that combination makes me feel. If you want to give it a shot, go to Troscriptions.com. My discount code is Blackburn. They just got the TroMune back in stock. I've still been enjoying their Trocalm on long drives or if I'm out of the house a lot, just getting a ton of stuff done around a bunch of people. I really like the grounding effect of that Trocalm product. I'll have to have Scott back on at some point to talk about the TroZ product that they have, which is a blend of a lot of different ingredients, adenosine, a little bit of cordycepin, but also an extract from the fly agaric mushroom, which is usually mind-altering, but that's the ibotenic acid part, I believe. And so this just contains agarin, which binds to GABA receptors and increases GABA. That seems to be the theme of a lot of their products, is this GABA promotion to counter our stressed society. I see it every day on social media. Everybody is stressed to the gills, and I believe all of the infighting and constantly tearing each other down is a result of being chronically stressed. And especially the people in the natural health community fit that description. So decreasing stress is kind of like an overarching theme of my message. And if you go to my website, matt-blackburn.com, you could read about my CLF protocol, which reduces oxidative stress in the body by reducing calcification, lipofuscin, and fibrosis. And then all of my recommended products I have on there take a burden off of the body and help to balance neurotransmitter function. So if your brain's firing correctly, you'll be less likely to fly off the handle. You'll have more mental clarity, more stable mood. Life will just be overall better. I'm the founder of Mitolife. You can find my supplement company at mitolife.co. Recently restocked our coffee beans. This batch is an organic blend from Peru. It's a light roast. It's delicious. I've been drinking 2 shots of it every day, and I am loving it. So that's under the living tab. We also have a water filter giveaway we're doing for this month. So whenever you make a purchase on the website, you're automatically entered in to win a free 7-stage water filter that we built from scratch that took a couple years to invent. So that's valued at $1,845. For every dollar you spend, you get 1 entry. So the more you spend, the higher the chance you'll win that water filter. And a lot of the products are still on sale. So if you've been curious to try our beef liver, oyster, jellyfish collagen, elk velvet antler, or encephalon, which I've been getting a ton of feedback on recently. People are loving that product. They think it's underrated. More people need to know about it. It's the combination of phosphatidylserine from sunflower, not soy, ginkgo biloba extract, and a really interesting microalgae extract. As far as I know, there's only one other brand on the market that has it, but it's blended with about 20 other ingredients. I like to keep the ingredient blend very minimal. So this microalgae is called Phyodactylum tricornidum. It's a trademark product called BrainFit. And the active ingredient is called fucoxanthin, which decreases oxidative stress, particularly in the brain, improving short and long-term memory and optimizing cognitive function. So combining that with Trozy or TroMune or TroCalm at night with maybe melatonin. I've been taking 200 milligrams of melatonin myself every night for the last, losing track, maybe 9 months now or something like that. And I'm doing it largely for anti-aging benefits and cancer prevention. So that would be an awesome sleep stack if you think you can improve your sleep quality. Might want to even add some zinc in there. I mean, there's endless combinations of things, jellyfish collagen, that you can use to support your brain to get a restful night's sleep. You can follow me on Instagram. My account is just Matt Blackburn. There's a Mitolife account on Instagram. That's where we're most active. Mitolife Official is the YouTube channel. And that is all for today. I will see you guys next Friday. Stay supercharged.